Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Quick video on Rafa Nadal and what's going on with him because he has actually just been promoted to the #1 seed at the Australian Open for 2023 because Carlos Alcaraz has pulled out, unfortunately, due to injury. But he's also lost 6 out of his last 7 matches. So this is a very interesting stage of his career. He's obviously towards the back end, but he's in this now unprecedented period as well, where he's actually never lost this many matches in a short period of time. He's never been on 6 out of 7 of his last matches lost. He had never lost more than I think it was 3 matches in a row. He went on to lose 4 and then managed to pick it up against Casper Ruud at the ATP finals, winning a dead rubber. But since then, played 2 matches at the United Cup, lost to Cam Norrie and Alex de Minaur in 3 setters. But it's been a interesting start, I guess, to the year. He's only played 1 match in 2023, but which was that Alex de Minaur match. But going into the Australian Open, there's a lot of question marks around what's going to happen in terms of his form, physically as well. How's he looking? We'll get into that, and I'll give you guys my views on what it might mean, especially him being #1 seed for the tournament too. And he'll of course be defending his title after beating Daniel Medvedev in the 2022 final in 5 sets in thrilling fashion, coming back from 2 sets to love down to win that final and his 22nd slam, or 21st slam even, sorry, because his 22nd, of course, was at Roland Garros. Before we get into it, though, remember to that like button and do subscribe if you are new. Really appreciate your support. Also, do leave a rating or review if you are listening on a podcast platform. And thank you so much to all the members on YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated, genuinely is. Please do leave comments as well, whether you're a member or not a member, but especially the members, on any suggestions you have for the Australian Open, any specific types of videos that we don't already do. And we'll see if we can add those into our Australian Open coverage for the 2 weeks. Okay, Rafa Nadal then. So he's clearly gained an advantage, and I'm sure he wouldn't have liked to have gained an advantage in this way by Alcaraz pulling out, and of course his compatriot, the 19-year-old superstar US Open champion, looking to go back-to-back in Grand Slam titles after winning his first in 2022 at the US Open. He's pulled out now because of a leg injury. Nadal, being a Spaniard himself as well, has now been elevated to #1 seed, that is. What does that mean in terms of going forward? Well, it doesn't, if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't think it has a huge bearing because he was going to be 2nd seed anyway. I think 1 and 2 for me in a Grand Slam doesn't really have much bearing. I think it's normally, for me, what it is there's groups of seedings which I think make a difference. So you have 1 and 2, and you have 3 till 5, and then after that it then continues. There's groups. So for example, 1 and 2, of course, expect to make the final. That's the expectation. 3 and 4, semi-finals. 5 to 8 is your quarterfinalists or expected quarterfinalists. And of course, that's how the draw then is also plays out, or how the draw is set up even, so that if the seeds rightfully win the matches they're expected to win, they will then meet. So for example, you would have, say, 1 play 8, and you might have 2 play 7 in the quarterfinals. And in the semi-finals, you might expect 1 versus 3 or 1 versus 4, and then 2 versus 3 or 2 versus 4. So I don't think Nadal actually being #1 seed has much bearing in terms of the actual draw, because he would have had a very similar draw anyway if he was #2 seed, potentially. In terms of confidence booster, I don't think it really matters. He's extremely experienced. He's been there and done it. He's also the reigning champion. So I don't necessarily think the seeding has any bearing on his tournament in terms of the bump up anyway from 2 to 1. I think if he was being bumped up from 3-1, then yes, there is an advantage there. If he was being bumped up from anywhere below the number 3 seed to 2 or 1, then 100% massive advantage. But from 2-1 to me, no difference. No difference. Honestly, I don't think it has much bearing, apart from the fact that he's got the number 1 by his name. And of course, he is the top seed. It doesn't really have much bearing, I think, on his draw, in my opinion. And mentally, as I said, I think he knows he's going to have to beat the best players out there, or at least some of the best players out there, to win the title and regain his Australian Open title, if he's to do it, that is. The more interesting part, I think, of this video and of this conversation is his form, because going into the Australian Open last year, he hadn't played any tournaments apart from that Melbourne Somerset the week before. It doesn't look like he's going to play any tennis at all before the Australian Open. Now, I could be wrong, because there is a little bit of time left before the Australian Open starts, but from my understanding, he's not going to be playing any tournaments before the Australian Open. Now, to me, that is pretty crazy, because he is physically fit. There is no real indicator that he's carrying any injuries. So he said, after losing at the United Cup, that he's not physically sick. He said he just needs to be a little bit faster, a little bit more dynamic on the pitch, or I guess the court, to read the game better. He says in terms of physical problems, he can't complain. So, I mean, it's interesting, because I think for him, the goal is to go to Melbourne. And I think they said, I think I'll go fast to Melbourne. We play again tomorrow. Of course, I don't want to play. But so he said he's going to go straight to Melbourne. He says he's not sure the schedule yet. Okay. So it doesn't sound like he's going to have any actual competition anyway before the Grand Slam. Now, the good thing about the Melbourne Somerset was it was a week before the Australian Open on those Melbourne courts. Now, that is fantastic, because what it meant is he was able to get to grips even with those specific courts, with the balls. And even though the competition wasn't the best, and there were some great plays, but you have to bear in mind he played Maxime Cressy in the final of that, who, albeit, is a very good player, but of course not. You wouldn't expect to see him in the quarterfinal of a slam, right? So there is a difference in ability to the top players at slams, and then also who we played in the final there. But it was enough for him to be able to adapt efficiently to the conditions around him, and then go on to actually win that slam, a slam where he hadn't had much success in terms of wins anyway there, because only winning that Grand Slam once, the Australian Open, quite a few years back. Of course, had some fantastic finals at the Australian Open, including that 2012 final against Novak Djokovic, which was an absolute marathon, unbelievable final. Of course, a few finals as well against Roger Federer, where he came out on the wrong end. So, he's had a lot of scar tissue from there. And the fact that he came back from 2-0 down and went on to win and beat Medvedev was impressive. Of course, there was no Novak Djokovic there, which was not ideal, I think, from a tennis perspective. But he, of course, did benefit from that, because he would have been the underdog. I think he was the underdog against Medvedev anyway. I think the two matches at the United Cup obviously would have helped to get some match sharpness back, but it's going to be interesting to see how he looks in the first few matches of the Australian Open, because I imagine if he's not scheduled to play anything else. So I think he was hoping that Spain would go further than they did. They didn't even make the playoffs. And of course, the final of the United Cup is, I think, tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. So that would have meant he would have had a week off, right? Instead, he's had quite a few days off. He's had only 2 weeks off, which is probably not ideal. But he'll get to Melbourne quicker. He'll be able to practice on those courts as well, have some practice sets and practice matches, I would imagine. Of course, they're not competition settings, but he has the experience you would assume to be able to then sharpen his tools and go into the Australian Open. The draw should be pretty favorable given his seeding. I think he'll be okay. I don't envisage him losing in the first or second round, but I also am not pessimistic, but I think I'm quite cautious about saying that he is a real contender for this, and that might sound crazy to say, given that he won two out of the last four slams, right? And of course, is the reigning champion going into this, but I've just got a feeling that the fact that he is physically okay, but form wise isn't quite there, is the most alarming thing. Because normally, to me, when Rafa goes on this type of run, where, and as I said, it is unprecedented. 6 out of the last 7 matches he's lost is unprecedented. It's never happened in his career. Now, age is definitely a factor, no doubt, of course, and the fact that they were playing on indoor hard courts, so 2 of those losses, 3 of those losses even on indoor hard courts, which is his weakest surface, no doubt, and has been throughout his career. He's missed a lot of ATP finals because of injury and just fatigue as well at the back end of the year, and Paris as well. He doesn't always play, so those are definitely some of the weaker tournaments that we would see Rafa in. But in saying that, the Australian Open courts are probably potentially just as quick, maybe slightly slower, but they're still they're rapid, these courts. The outdoor conditions do suit him. He likes the elements. He's very good at handling them, better than the most on tour. And it definitely becomes an advantage for him against most opponents. The biggest question mark is going to be how is he striking the ball from the back of the court, and I don't think he's been hitting through the court as well as we might have expected in these last 7 matches. There have been spots where he's looked pretty good, but what he did really well at the Australian Open last year, Rafa, was being more aggressive at times, and I know he actually ended up winning that tournament by playing some fantastic defensive tennis, by slicing fantastically well, utilizing some really good tactics at times. But what he also managed to do, and what he also knew he had to do, was flatten his ground strokes when needed on a faster surface. Hitting that lasso forehand cross court with a lot of air, a lot of just a lot of airtime isn't really conducive to these conditions, especially if you're going to go cross court to someone's backhand like a Medvedev or a Zverev, and it's not deep enough in court. Then it just sits up, and it's so hittable, so attackable on the forehand or backhand side. So it'll be interesting to see whether he does try to do a similar thing. He's also tinkered with his return position. I saw at the back end of last year, seeing whether he could actually almost return the first serve on the baseline and shorter kind of cuts at the ball on the return, and then almost like a little flat slap back into play at times. Not really the lasso forehand that we expect from Rafa, more of a kind of reacting short backswing, kind of deflection on the forehand side or backhand side. And it did work at times. I think varying success is probably the right phrase for that tactic that he's tried to utilize, but not all the time. He's varied it. He really has. And I wonder whether it's maybe not something that he's looking to do all the time, but something that he's trying to adopt when possible to put a server off their rhythm, especially if someone is going to then serve and volley a lot. If he's standing far back, like, for example, Daniel Medvedev does exactly the same thing, and people then, like a Nick Kyrgios, will take that return position and say, well, I can use that to my advantage because I'm going to serve out wide. I might hit the odd slice serve or kick serve out wide, then I'll come forward to the net, and I know that I can close the angle, and you're going to have to hit an incredible return pass to get anywhere to get past me, or even to make it a hard volley. So I wonder whether Nadal maybe has seen Medvedev get exposed a little bit for that, and then thought maybe I need to also adapt my game on hardcore anyway, at least to potentially counteract that and have something different in my locker that I can say and I can use even against opponents when I feel like I'm on the back foot on return. Then I can say, okay, well, I'm going to take the ball earlier. I'm not going to give you a chance to come and serve volley. You're going to have to then try and trade me from the back of the court, and I'm most likely going to come out on top. So that's been another interesting little tinker to his game, or an experiment maybe. I don't know whether it was just something experimental that he was trying, and maybe we'll never see it again. That could definitely be the case, but it's good that he is trying different things, because people might forget this or might not even know, but he actually has the highest percentage of return games won in history. Now, a lot of people will say that Djokovic is arguably the best returner of all time, and I tend to probably agree with that, despite being a Rafa fan. But he's obviously up there, right? He's second at least, I would say. So he's clearly an incredible returner, and part of that is probably due to the fact that he has been so good at sticking to something that clearly has worked, and then he's adapted when need be. But we haven't really seen him move up on the return as much as he has done recently. So whether that is a regular fixture in his game going forward, we'll see. But the biggest thing for me, I think, going into the Australian Open is, as I said, how he's striking the ball, but also his serve is the biggest thing, because what he did really well at the Australian Open is managed to get quite a few 3 points on his serve. He also hit the flat serve out wide really well on the deuce side. It wasn't curving into the righty forehand. It was flat, so carried on its flat trajectory out wide, dragging the righty forehand. And he'd win a lot of 3 points off that. People trying to cash him because it's into their forehand, but they're on the stretch. Even hit aces at times on that side. Similarly, as well, we know that his serve on the ad side, the lefty serve out wide, is a natural, but he's managed to also utilize the serve down the tee to the backhand side, to the forehand side of a righty very well as well. And his net play was phenomenal at the Australian Open. And that's something that he would have to, again, really rely on, I think, at times. The serve, the volleying, and also the backhand slice, I thought was so good in that tournament. Not just the backhand slice, but the backhand generally. He was hitting it so cleanly, got him out of trouble at times. It was so reliable. And a lot of people talk about the forehand because it is one of the best forehands ever. But the backhand is a very, very underrated tool for a lot of people that maybe aren't hardcore tennis fans. They might not realize how good his backhand is, in the sense that it is the more reliable side, no doubt. And also the way that he's able to really not necessarily always hurt people with it, but he can hurt people with it. But the way he's able to rely on it in the big moments is fantastic. And the backhand slice is a component of that side, no doubt, and something that he has utilized fantastically well at times, whether it be slicing low and deep, low and deep into an opponent's backhand to mix it up and hopefully disrupt an opponent's rhythm, or whether it's hitting the shorter slice at an angle to drag someone forward, then to come into the net because he knows they're uncomfortable, like Daniel Medvedev. So there's a lot of things to dissect here. And, what would be very interesting is if we saw Nadal versus Djokovic at the Australian Open in the latter stages of the Grand Slam, because really I think we'd get a feel of where Nadal's hard court game now stacks up to Djokovic's hard court game after a few years now, actually, of them playing, say, in a hard court Grand Slam. So I would be really intrigued to see that. I think Djokovic would be the favorite, no doubt. I mean, he's arguably the best hard court player ever. So, and that hasn't changed. And we saw recently him dismantling Daniel Medvedev in Adelaide. He's going to be the massive favourite going into the Australian Open with Alcaraz injured and Nadal not looking in the best of form on paper. But I think Nadal will turn it around. He's one of the most mentally strong players on tour. He's a mental giant, no doubt. And I think he will turn it around. He'll probably get a relatively favourable draw, you would imagine. If he does, it will be good for him to hope. Well, his team will be hoping for him to get some straight set wins under his belt for the first couple of rounds to build up confidence and then peak in the second week. For Djokovic, he's looking really, really good. So we'll see whether they're to meet. But I think the fact that he's lost to some of the players that maybe he's been expected to win against recently, Rafa, is potentially the biggest thing. And also, what might be slightly worrying for people that are Rafa fans is that the last two matches he's played, he actually won the first sets in both 6-3. So against Alex de Minaur and Cam Norrie. He then lost the second set pretty comfortably. And the third sets were tight, but he lost them 6-4 and 7-5. So clearly a little dip. And we did see that, by the way, at the Australian Open and at a lot of the slams from Rafa, Roland Garros even included. So the two slams he won, we saw that in some rounds where he wouldn't necessarily take a set off, but he would have a substantial dip. And I think there's a mixture of reasons for that. One is to do with the age factor, and I think he maybe can't keep up the intensity to the fullest for 3 consecutive sets. He can do it for 3 sets, but maybe not for 3 consecutive sets, which is why he might win in 4 or 5. And that happened a fair bit in the 2 slams he won. It could also be the fact that he is carrying some sort of injury. Now, that hasn't been the case recently. He himself has said that he's not injured. So that's not a factor then. So it's either the fact of the intensity factor that I talked about, or it's the fact that maybe he hasn't played. I don't know, maybe he's just getting used to the courts. He said, he's a little bit slow off the mark. So maybe it's a little bit of lack of match practice potentially, although the last time he played a few exhibition matches against Ruud, but I don't know whether we can look into those. But let's say the last competitive match was against Ruud as well, 17th of November, then played 31st of December. I mean, it's only over a month. It's not a long time in between tournaments. We'll see. I think. We'll see. I wouldn't be surprised if Rafa goes on to even win the tournament at the Australian Open. Well, maybe I would be, but it wouldn't be oh, wow, this is the most surprising thing I've ever seen. It would be, oh, wow, okay, that's a little bit of a surprise because he came into this in not great form, but he's one of the greatest to ever hold a tennis racket. So, he has defied the odds at many points in his career, including a lot of people thinking that he would have been retired by this age. So he's 36 years of age and he won two out of the 4 slams last year. So let's not count him out just yet. But there are some question marks, as I've pointed out in this video, because as I said, it's unprecedented territory, and he's going to go into a tournament where his results over his career haven't maybe been as good as he would have liked, but he is the reigning champion, and that does mean a lot as well. So let's see how he gets on. But I just wanted to talk about this. I'll probably give a more detailed view on Nadal as we get closer to the Australian Open and talk about it more from a tactical standpoint against specific people as well. But let me know your thoughts on Nadal. Do you think him being elevated to number 1 spot is a massive advantage, or do you think, like myself, that actually doesn't really mean much, going from 2 to 1? And also, what do you think of his recent form? Losing 6 out of the last 7 matches, do you think that's going to really hamper him going into the Australian Open? Does it even mean that he's not even a candidate to win it? He's not even in your top 3, 4, even 5 predicted winners. Or do you think that actually it doesn't matter and he'll go into it and potentially even win it? Let me know your thoughts. As always, really interested to chat to you guys in the comment section. And I always do get to all the comments as long as they're sensible ones. So thank you very much, guys. Stay safe and well. We'll see you on the next video.